All right, questions for the first round of lightning presenters. Questions? Any questions from the audience? Back there, yep.
John Sapples from the Cato Institute. I'm reluctant to ask this question because it's going to sound pessimistic and I don't want to, so I'll just put the facts out there. It's a question that applies to a lot of that I've heard at this conference. I'm by background a political scientist, and the oldest and in some ways the firmest finding of political science is that voters in general don't know much. And that's like a 60-year finding. The problem always is, in rooms like this, people know a lot about politics, but voters don't know. Voters don't know much. Voters don't know much about politics. They may well know a lot about cars and things like that, or consumer goods. And the reason advanced for that over time is that rational ignorance is actually a natural equilibrium, right? If people vote, they don't have a great deal at stake. So it's very unlikely that a single vote will change an election, which would have an enormous effect. So the incentives for finding information, for thinking critically about information, and for knowing a lot about politics are actually quite poor. And that theory is actually an explanation of what we observe and have observed, I should add, for 60 years in surveys. So given all of that, and not wanting to be pessimistic, I guess I would just say, given that fact, how can we expect to deal with this problem of incentives? Because I think maybe it doesn't apply to what you're talking about, but it does, to me, seem to apply.
Is it on? I don't think this is on. But hello? Oh, there it is. Sorry. So I actually think this is a great question, because I think that what the purveyors of misinformation have done really well is they go into exactly that place that you're talking about, which is people are disinterested, which is why these memes and these online digital content spreads the way it does. I was talking to a gentleman before this conversation, or before I came up here, and I was saying they're just better at this stuff than the fact people are. They really know how to go into sort of personal biases and split people off who are like, I kind of believe part of this. And I think the solution to me is less regulation and less finger wagging, and more, we need to get better at reaching people where they live with this type of information in the ways that they consume it. Because it's interesting, a lot of people view these narratives from fake news purveyors as negative. It's actually positive. Their storytelling ability, their narratives are affirmational to their audience. And we, if we're gonna like combat this, need an affirmational, value add for people to consume the truth, so to speak. So it's less finger wagging and more reaching people where they live in a way that they actually care about, which I would argue we're awful at.
I'll just say a few things outside of politics. So I'll sort of put that aside and just say that in my class, we sort of treat misinformation, disinformation much more broadly than politics. In fact, we try to avoid those kind of conversations that we can't fully avoid them, but they're just such low-hanging fruit, and students are pretty good at least the tests that we have. People do care about their health, though, and they do care about making decisions that might improve their quality of living or their family. And there's a lot of disinformation out there, and my sort of concern, like I mentioned in my talk, is around the misinformation about and in science, and that I do think we need people to be able to reason a little bit more, and at least sort of have a set of skills to make sort of decisions. So when I think about this MisinfoCon or just the misinformation field emerging, I think of it much broader than politics. But your point is an interesting point, and maybe I'd love to talk more offline about that.
Okay, great. I guess I also feel that sometimes ambivalence, I suppose, about where we are situationally right now, in the sense that an additional problem is really the abundance of information, right? So not only do you have the issue that people maybe in certain realms they don't seem like that they care, but added to that is this challenge of the weight of it. There's so much information, and so in terms of trying to sift it and trying to prioritize what's important versus other, that's an additional challenge that people didn't have as much earlier. But I guess I have two additional thoughts. One was that honestly, as Jevin said too, the smaller realms, these are also political realms, these issues about health. And I have asked in this recent period too about my own personal relationships, family, and friends that are actually on many sides of the spectrum and voted in different ways during this past election. And thinking about like, what does it mean to authentically engage with them, people I care about issues, maybe not sort of P with a capital P, but small p. So maybe there is that opportunity there that we need to think about. What does authentic exchange mean with so much information? And maybe one final thing. I have a 9-year-old son, and we were recently in England this past year, and they actually have news education for very young people. Once a week, they have something called News Round, and so they look at, with their whole class, these little excerpts from the news, and they love it. They love it. And so that was actually also inspiring and hopeful that maybe we don't have the conditions now, but there could be these conditions to create curiosity and promote productive discussion.
One quick thought. I think it was E.B. White who said something like, democracy is the recurring suspicion that more than people are right more than half the time. That feels appropriate for what you are saying. And the thing is that people do vote with more knowledge when they think they have a stake in the outcome. It seems to me that people have recognized in somewhat larger numbers than I anticipated that voting does matter. That 2016 was a shock to a whole lot of people who, forget the Jill Stein voters, but a whole lot of people who just said, screw it. She's going to win, doesn't matter. That was a shock to the system, and the result of that, the profound changes that have been occurring in this country, really major changes and going to go accelerate at the current status quo, is something people have taken seriously. So I think there's more interest now than there was. And it may be that low information will always be a problem, but the closer it gets to home, the more information. From my ancient studies in political science, which was my major, seems possible that there will be some willingness and needing of more information.
Thank you. That was a great question. Next question. Do we have a next question? Thank you. Please state your name, affiliation, make it brief, and make sure it's a question, please. Thank you.
Will do, Dwight. This is, I'm Nick Adams from the Goodley Labs. This question is especially for Jevin and Dan, but anyone else on the panel, sure. And I'm really channeling Dana Boyd from the Data and Society Institute. She has a concern that if we just teach people media literacy or news literacy, that you're actually giving people the ammunition they need to kind of weaponize doubt, that everyone can learn to call bullshit on anything, and that maybe we need some way to not just arm individuals with this doubt, but to have a broader, maybe consensual framework for people to understand media literacy. Maybe it's something like the Public Editor Project, but I'm just curious, how would you respond to that, since you're actually arming people with doubt in her framework?
Yeah, and actually, I'm a huge fan of Dana's work, and she's always very provocative in her questioning, and really, and I'm familiar with that writing. I still don't think it's a good reason not to arm people with critical reasoning and skills for understanding their digital environments. But I get the point. I mean, I've recognized when I talk to middle schoolers, that's the level in which I start getting concerned about giving them too much doubt about the world. At that point, they're just starting to learn, and if you crumble everything about all the foundation under them about what might be true about the world, that could be, we want to create a new generation of nihilists or something that just doesn't trust anything. And so that's where I'm more concerned necessarily than arming people with the ability to then know how to manipulate the system. That's going to happen no matter what. So I still think we should be teaching critical reasoning, but where I have pause is in having them question everything. So I'll give you one last example. My love affair with science may not come out when I tend to be critical of some of the problems, whether it's reproducibility crisis, p-hacking, all the outcome switching, all the kinds of things that we need to clean up in science, because that is a true bastion, we hope, of somewhat truthiness. And when I criticize it, I always start lectures with my love affair with science, and that it still works, for crying out loud. And you still fly in, 747s. You still, we still have these beautiful things called vaccines that are saving millions of people's lives. But I still think it's okay to have even that middle schooler question the things that they're hearing, especially when it deals with their health and stuff.
First of all, the airlines are retiring the 747s.
That's right. New and greater. Back to the Concorde.
I share the affection for Dana. She's been one of my favorite people for a long time. And I think that what you're referring to was a hypothesis more than a conclusion. It needs a whole lot of testing, which we've done very little of. We need so much more data research in this field. But the part of bringing news and media literacy, and I think embedding it in other things as opposed to making it a topic, really is going to be the best way. If it's not skepticism based on everything should be checked, period. It's skepticism based on wanting evidence. So when her worry is that people become skeptical of everything, for example, science or vaccines or whatever, well, that's often based on actually no evidence or lies. So I want to build critical thinking with a foundation of fact as opposed to a foundation of belief, which is the part that worries her a lot and it worries all of us. But at the core, we need much more and better research, and I think much more and better work in this whole area. But it's pretty, there hasn't been much until quite recently. So I think we're at the beginning.
Well, I do want to join your comment with the gentleman comment over here, which is, I think part of this is it's emotional. There's a lot of emotion behind this stuff. And so the narratives that are built online, that's already built into it. This mistrust of facts, that's a big part of their narratives. And so building out a curriculum to critically analyze this stuff, well, yeah, great. There's somebody on the other side who's already been doing that online for a long time. Don't trust anything about the government, or don't trust, the mainstream media. That's a big part of their narrative and where it allows them to reach their people emotionally. And how this connects back to the political part of it is what these guys have done really well is they've localized a lot of these conversations in a way that is related to science, related to any number of things that affects people on the daily basis. And part of it is, the curriculum and all of that. But the other part of it is, how do we also reach people where they live in a way that is emotional, that they will actually share? Because I would argue that the biggest problem to solve for here is they have an organic audience that just reshares because they feel like what is being said in these fake news validates their everyday life. And I think that's a trickier question underlying all of this.
I have one thought, which is that I think in addition, alongside to critical thinking skills, is that we need to also be talking about people talking about truth with more complexity, right? So in other words, the numbers thing, I really like trying to demystify numbers too, right? Because they're so opaque, right? You see a number and you're like, what do I do with that number? Or in some of these situations too, like talking about facts, I think sometimes we're in danger of replicating the same binaries in certain very complicated issues. And so if we're teaching the critical thinking skills, we do need to start talking about at the same time, talking about truth with complexity and having people being comfortable with that complexity. I think, perhaps that's one thing that we haven't been doing as much as how to be, comfortable with the fact that there is difference and a little bit of diversity and a little bit of like, a little spectrum there. And the reason why I think about this has to do with, for example, when you start talking about genocide or the reporting of genocide. My background is as a German history person, and I think about these numbers related to the Holocaust, for example, or in more recent work, numbers related to human rights violations, say in Burundi. It's not to say that these events aren't happening. How concrete can you be about these numbers? The reports are very difficult, and you try to gather as best as you can, not to undermine the scientific process, not to undermining a very good reporting process. So how do you teach trust in that critically, as well as I think trying to give people a vocabulary for complex thinking? And that would be, I think those are the two things I would say hand in hand.
Thanks, Nick. That was a good question. We have time for one more question. Yeah, there in the back.
Gleb Saporsky with the Pro-Truth Pledge. So something that I was noticing, there's a lot of focus on fighting bullshit, and so on. And I'm wondering, how much focus is there on the opposite aspect of fighting misinformation, which is loving truth, caring about truth, which is a really different emotion, taps at really different things. And that's something I haven't yet heard about spoken of. And then tying it to politics as well, there is a lot of movements right now to unite the country as opposed to divide it, which I think is tied to call to love truth, unite our country, be patriotic, as opposed to split apart and fight misinformation, fight bullshit. So I'm curious about your commentary and your thoughts on those things.
I can just say a couple of things. It's an interesting question. One thing that researchers have found that that live in these conspiracy worlds, that read this and can be completely disoriented to the researchers themselves, they have found a few things that I found super interesting. Kate Starberg is one researcher at our university that's found some of this stuff. One is that these online conspiracy communities are gateways to other conspiracy communities. So if you, if you sort of stumbled upon a website around anti-vaccination or whatever, you're invited to be a critical reason. You're questioning the institutions that are telling you how to think. And so these individuals are in love, I think, with the truth and do want to seek truth in some ways. I think, I give most people the benefit of the doubt across the political spectrum that want to get at truth. And and they're inviting in the same ways that we do at universities. We want to make you better critical thinkers. Well, do you want to be a critical thinker and just accept that vaccine? Well, come on in. So they come on into these communities and they start to, you get this illusionary truth effect where you sort of keep hearing the same thing and you start to believe it. And then before you know it, they find these same individuals, these same people that were in this anti-vaccination community, now in the flat Earth communities, and they're tracking a lot of these people that move from one to the next and become sort of gateways. But the gateway, the original gateway, is sort of being a part of this group, being that independent thinker, a critical reasoner, which is sort of hard to. That's the same sort of thing that we're recruiting at university campuses, and both groups seem to be after becoming smarter or closer to the truth.
Truth, capital T, is different than reality. And one of the issues, and I think it's directly related to the science question, which is that the whole scientific method at some level is about attacking what has been the perceived truth to find out if it's wrong, to iterate, to test, to hypothesize, to see if we can figure out a little bit better. And to the point just made, everything is complicated, and we treat things as if they're not. That's one of the worries in saying, yeah, believe the truth. I really want people to believe in nuance and to understand. Well, anyone who is in a family, and which would include everyone here, knows that life is complicated. Yet oddly, we turn everything into binary yes and no, true or not. So we have a lot of work to do on I want truth with various meanings, but I want fact-based, evidence-based truth.
I think in addition to all of that, we have to facilitate conversation in a meaningful way, in a serious way, that allows people to feel safe to say how they feel. And that may sound Pollyannish, but the internet does a great job of siloing people by belief. And that truth is relative to those beliefs online, which is why those various Reddit channels and everything else are so popular. People just want to feel like they belong. And part of that appeal is, here's a group of people that believes in this truth, and that truth is that these other people are idiots and don't know what they're talking about. And so the solution to that really is, how do we facilitate conversation and community in real life? Which, again, sounds Pollyannish, and it's probably not very useful, but, you know, similar to what he said in a family, you can say things online that you would never say to a person at a bar. You can say things online and you can participate in actions online that you never would do in real life. And I think part of it is figuring out that, solving for that binary, which is life is complex, truth is relative. How do we allow people to live in that in a way that they feel comfortable with each other, as opposed to going off to their sides of the room like little children and demonizing the other group.
All right, so please join me in thanking our lightning round presenters. Thank you. That was fantastic. We're going to break for coffee. We're going to be back here in 10 minutes, so 11:05. 11:05, everyone. Thank you.